Hey Writer Rebels, today we are going to be answering one of our viewers' comments. So join me today as I talk about what I would do differently. Hey everyone, it's me, Scarlett Kol, young adult author, YouTuber, and storyteller, and I'm here today to answer a question from one of our viewers. So Tanya Stephenson had asked me on my last video, if you got to start over, what would you do differently? So this was a very complex and interesting question, so instead of just responding in the comments, I figured I would make a video about it. So here we are. Anyhow, if you are just here for the first time, thank you so much for coming by my channel. I have a ton of videos you can definitely check out. And if you'd like to be a subscriber, just hit that subscription bar and the notification bell below this video so for YouTube to let you know every time I put out new content. So, what would I do differently? I have been published since 2018 and I've been writing for quite a long time, and there's a lot of things that I feel that I've probably made mistakes coming up through my writing career. However, there's also some things that I don't think I would change, even though they didn't necessarily put me in the position that I wanted to be, or I could have been in certain places faster, because I think that the experience that I went through was definitely valuable. So I'm going to tell you the top 3 things that I would have done differently if I was starting my writing career all over again. I'm going to be using specifically my writing career, not just a general writing career, and then talk about a few of the things that may have hindered my progress, but have definitely helped me become the writer and author that I am today. So the first thing I would have done differently is that I would have written in series. So my first 2 books that came out were completely different genres and were actually 2 very, very different stories. They came out very close together just because I was working with 2 different publishers at the same time, and they kind of came up around the same time. So like 2 weeks of each other. But I wrote them originally trying to go down the traditional publishing path. So I did sell them to small publishers, and I was actually going through the whole query process. I was originally trying to get an agent, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. And I had always been given this advice that if you are going to write a book for TradPub, that you needed to write one that was completely standalone, but had options for a series. So basically marketing as, this is the book with series potential. So that's kind of how I structured my books. They've kind of got a little bit left in case I wanted to continue it, but it was definitely a full encompassing story. And I didn't start writing any sequels or anything like that, because there's always the horror stories of stories being picked up and then the publisher does not want to continue the series, and you've wasted all of this time essentially writing sequels for a book that didn't take off and now the publisher doesn't want them. So I didn't write sequels, and I had intended to originally. My second book, Wicked Descent, was meant to be a duology, and my first book, Mercury Rises, was meant to be a trilogy, and I didn't do it. I got into marketing, I got very busy, which is something I will talk about a little bit later as well, and I just never came back to those stories. I moved ahead, I wrote other books, I put more books out, and I really put out a lot of standalone books. Pretty much all of my books are standalone. So as much as I love a standalone story, and it's a nice little, palate cleanser in between long series, there is definitely something in terms of retaining readers and getting people into your worlds that a series provides that a standalone just doesn't. Because every time you start in a standalone, you're going into a new world, you're changing the characters, you're changing the dynamic, you're changing the voice slightly, and people just can't get immersed in it. People love to binge Netflix. There's a reason for that. They just love to fall into these worlds, and writing in a series is a great way to do that. So I think that I would have worked a little bit more on those series, or even if I didn't do it originally, go back and add to those first few books and make them out to the series that they were intended to be, and see if that would have been a little bit more marketable than just standalone books. The second thing I would have done differently is I would have made a plan. One of the things when you first jump into publishing is that there are so many things you can do. There are so many anthologies you want to be part of and groups, and you could be marketing on social media, and you want to be doing ads, and you want to be doing this, and you want to be taking this course, and you want to do all of the things and write these 10,000 bajillion stories in the meantime. And it gets to be a lot. So one of the things I wish I would have done is created a plan of what I wanted to do. This probably would have involved writing those sequels that I mentioned in my first, I guess, regret, but I would have had a direction of where I was going. I was kind of floundering after those books came out because there were just so many things to do, and I was just trying to do everything. And I got to meet some really great authors. I got to do some really cool stuff because of that. But on the same note, I didn't really have a lot of trajectory in any particular direction. So if I had a plan, even if the plan was not excellent, at least if it was going in a general direction, I would have started to create some sort of momentum. And that's something I definitely didn't do. And I ended up spending a lot of money because I ended up, buying all of these courses and buying into certain things and paying to do certain stuff and redoing things because I, just kept getting this like fear of missing out, this FOMO that just kept pushing me to go forward. So I wish I would have had a plan, at least even just for my first year, or, these are the first 3 or 4 books that I'm going to do, and then I can pivot after I see what's going on out there. But I basically walked in like a kid at their first time in Disneyland, and you just don't even know what to do, and you want to do absolutely everything. So if I had to do it differently, I would have created a plan, tried to execute the plan, and hopefully the plan would have succeeded. And the third thing I wish I would have done is I would have spent more time understanding the market. I had never heard the term writing to market before, and writing to market is not the same as writing to trend. So I believe I have a video on that if you want to check it out. If I do, I will put it in the comments below. But I did not know so much about marketing. I was just writing stories that I wanted to write. And a lot of authors do that right out the gate. They're just writing something that kind of pops in their head. But I really wished I would have spent more time understanding the market and kind of seeing what kind of tropes and things there were. I specifically went into books and tried to twist tropes, and not necessarily in sort of making it novel and unique. It was more of this is the typical trope that people like, so I'm going to do the opposite of that thing. And I don't think that necessarily worked out really well for me, because one of the reasons that people read certain tropes is because they love them, and you can definitely twist them and make them your own and make them original. But I was basically trying to go in the face of all that stuff. So that really hindered me, I think, because in edits, a lot of that stuff needed to change. So I ended up doing a lot of rewrites, and I clearly didn't understand how the market goes for books. They're looking for particular things. The reason certain things show up so often is because people like to read them. So instead of trying to, be this special snowflake that changes everything, I really should have learned more about the market and applied that to my writing. This is one of those things you don't know until you know. So this is something in hindsight I can talk about, but definitely in the moment, I wouldn't have any idea that that was the thing. Now, there were a few things that I did that a lot of people will probably think that if I had a chance to do it differently, I probably would. And there are things that definitely hindered my progress, but it isn't necessarily something that I would absolutely change. So one of the first things is that I started with small presses, and then I went into self-publishing. A lot of people ask me, why didn't I just self-publish from the beginning? Or why didn't I stay with small presses? Well, for me, I had started out querying traditionally. I got very close to an agent a couple of times. And as exciting as that was, it's a very long process if you've ever done it. But I learned so much through doing that. I didn't know what I didn't know. I hadn't done all of this research in terms of publishing. I had spent more time on craft and writing and all of that kind of stuff and working on those books. So when I sold my books to small presses, it gave me that opportunity to see more of that publishing side that I really didn't know. My first book that I sold was actually Wicked Descent, and the editor for that one, she was like ruthless. She gave me this really intense edit letter. She actually sat down and talked to me about things. There were tons of stuff that I needed to change, which makes sense because it was my first novel I'd ever written. And I really learned so much through that experience. There was so much of my writing that I learned through that process. And I don't necessarily think that I would have learned that had I gone straight into self-publishing. The reason for that is, yes, I hire editors, and yes, I like to get good editors, but first off, I didn't know what a good editor looked like. And secondly, when you have the opportunity of self-publishing, you're really in control of what gets changed. So if I had that same edit letter and I had those same recommended changes that I would have got on that first book from somebody I had paid to edit for me, and then I had final say on, I probably wouldn't have made all of those changes. And not necessarily out of arrogance, but just out of inexperience. Just thinking that maybe that person didn't understand my book or something like that. There were so many things I learned about figuring out what things I needed to change, how I needed to change them, and why, and also figuring out what hills to die on. I didn't necessarily change absolutely everything that they suggested, but knowing that if I didn't make some of the changes, or at least significant amount of the changes, they weren't going to publish my book. I was forced to be in that situation where I had to analyze every single change, see why it made sense, and learn from it. If I was been in the position where I was not required to do that, I don't know if I would. So as much as it would have probably sped me along a little bit quicker if I'd started self-publishing, I don't think my books would be of the same quality that they are now if I had not gone through that process. And if you've read my books, hopefully you think they're good quality. And if you don't, you can just imagine the disaster that it would have been had I not gone that way. The other thing that a lot of people say is something you shouldn't do, and I 100% agree with it, is I did a little genre jumping at the beginning. My first book that came out was a dystopian. My second one was a paranormal, and then I got into fairy tales, and then I went back to paranormal. So they're all kind of under that YA umbrella, which fortunately is a little bit more forgiving, but they're still very different genres and have very different audiences. So my dystopian has no magic in it, and there's a lot of people who were really not interested in reading my paranormal because that's not really the kind of thing that they want to read. And I totally get that. However, had I not done that, Mercury Rises, that's my dystopian novel, this one right here, is still one of my favorite stories that I've ever written. I love the cast of characters. I love the story. And there's so much about it that I think is great. And would it have made more sense for me to come in with a paranormal story and stick with paranormal? 100%. It would have helped my career out a bunch. But there's no books that I have kind of in my repertoire that I'd want to get rid of. There wasn't any books that I regret writing. And if I had stuck straight to just sticking with one genre, I don't know if this book would have ever appeared. It's still my best-selling book. I don't know if it would have taken off like it did. It might have really pushed a lot of my stuff for my career. So as much as I wouldn't suggest genre jumping, and if I was starting completely from scratch, I would make sure that I stuck with one genre. It's not something that I would ever take back either. And the third thing that I don't regret, but definitely didn't help me out, is starting an AuthorTube channel. Obviously, talking to writers, I know writers are readers, but I'm sure most of you out there probably haven't read my books or are not necessarily interested in it because it's not your genre. I'm sure there's a few of you out there that may be interested in it, but that's probably not why you watch my videos. You probably watch them for writerly content or talking about writing and publishing process or some of my experiences that way. And in terms of my author career and in terms of being a writer, that really doesn't do much for me. But I absolutely love being on AuthorTube. I love being able to talk to a bunch of people. I love the fact that I get emails periodically of people that I've helped or have helped them solve a problem or told them about something that they didn't know or gave them information. I love helping people. I love talking about writing. I love talking about publishing. And it isn't necessarily something that I would suggest somebody do if they're trying to build their author career, because it's really not going to do much for them as an author unless they're writing nonfiction. So this isn't something that I would suggest. It's taken up a lot of my time, but I love doing it and I would never change anything about that. So hopefully that answers your question, Tanya. And thank you so much for asking me a question in the comments. I really enjoyed doing this video. And if any of you ever have any other comments or questions that you have that you would like me to talk about, then definitely include those in the comments, because I do read them and I do turn them into videos on occasion. So thank you so much for watching. If you want to be a subscriber, easy thing to do, hit that subscription bar and the notification bell, or just keep coming back and checking out my content. But thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you all later.